Thank you very much, Clara. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for attending this session. And like Clara said before, if you can't see very well what's on the screen, there's still a few spots here in the front which might make it easier to work and learn about the visualizations over the next hour or so. So yeah, my name is Peter Speyer. I'm the Chief Data and Technology Officer at the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. And so I oversee the areas of data management, IT, and data visualizations. So the things I'm going to show you today, we have developed over the past 3 or 4 years. And it came up in the conversation after Chris's talk this morning that some of these tools are rather complex. So I'm going to try to help you kind of navigate that. Keep in mind, these tools are also tools that we use at the Institute to review results, vet input data, so we use it for our daily work. And so that makes those tools sometimes a little more complex than one would expect. But once you get over the hump of kind of how does it work and what can it do, they're incredibly powerful to really get into the details of the results. I tend to speak fast, so if you can't follow or you feel like I should be slowing down, wave your arms. If enough people wave, I will slow down for a little bit and then continue. Also, I will show you 6 or 7 different visualization tools, all of which but one are publicly available on the website, and so you can use the visualizations right after the session or in the next few days and try it on your own. But please ask questions as I go along. I'm happy to talk about the visualizations, the underlying data, anything else that may be of interest. It should be an interactive session. You should really be able to afterwards use the tools and hopefully be relatively comfortable with going through these. So I'm going to start with showing you the site on the IHME page that lists all the data visualizations that we do. So you can either go to the URL you see at the top, which is healthdata.org/results/data-visualizations. You can navigate on the IHME website to that page or search for it. The URL is healthdata.org/results/data-visualizations. Yes, Jed will in the next session repeat the URL as well. You're welcome. So when you get to this page, you'll see a long list of different types of visualizations. About half of them are related to the global burden of disease, the other half are not. So I'll talk about the GBD ones today. Everything else, please feel free to explore. There's plenty of options on the website to contact us. If you send us an email, or I'll put my email up at the end, we will answer and we'll get back to you and help you with these visualization tools. So I thought I'd go through the GBD visualizations in the same order that Chris talked about the components this morning. So starting with mortality, the visualization that he used is on the website. And if you Google mortality viz, this is the first hit that is going to come up. I'll also make the screen a tad bigger. But all of what you see looks the same on the IHME website. So, like Chris said this morning, we have a lot of components that you now see for just all-cause mortality within GBD. And this visualization tool, if you look along the tabs at the top here, will actually take you through the process of how we develop mortality estimates and basically explain the steps as well as provide you some of the insights on how we get to the results. So I'll repeat a little bit of what Chris showed you, but I think it's really important if you are interested in the underlying demographic and mortality results to be very familiar with this. So this is the 5Q0 analysis, or the probability of dying before the age of 5. And what you see on the screen is the large graph here in the middle is the input data points and the results that we have for child mortality, and I already pulled up Argentina. You have details for neonatal age groups as well as 1 to 4, and then a global view of the data, so you can kind of put those into context. As Chris also pointed out, you see the data for every data point where we got the data. At the bottom you see the citation, and Chris mentioned the Global Health Data Exchange. Every data point that you see here, you can look up in the GHDX and get more information about where did we find the data, who can provide you with the data, what do the data cover. So that's kind of a useful connection to make as you explore the data more. You have a lot of settings on the left, and I encourage you that when you have time to actually go through those in details, but you can look at these data for every country in the world that we have results for, so 188 different countries. You can change the time frame, so if you just are interested in 1990 to 2014, or just in a certain decade, you can kind of limit your analysis. You'll see it more detailed, and it's a little easier to navigate. You can look at different subsections of the data, and especially you can look at data as we got them in raw form or adjusted them, and I'll talk a little more about adjustments when we get to the cause of death analysis. You can zoom into the map if you want more detail here and are interested in particular countries. So there's quite a few options to work with the data. So 5Q analysis is what I just showed you. The results basically show that to you without the input data points, and it shows you're able to compare different countries. So you dive more into the results of the analysis. Completeness, Chris showed, this is the VR completeness where we're looking at what percentage of deaths does a vital registration system in a country cover. And also, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but it's a nice quick view. It doesn't load quick, but once it's up, it's a quick view of kind of the completeness of a vital registration system. The second big part that I wanted to show you is then the 45Q15, so the adult mortality analysis. Oh, okay, it loaded. Here's the completeness, and like Chris said, for Argentina, we assume it's actually complete, and it's 99% or so, which is very different from country to country. And you see the percentages here at the bottom, where for India we have 27% of deaths covered by sample registration systems. For 45Q0, the logic is pretty much the same, where we show the input data point and the results of our analyses, and then you have the results that you can look at. So the logic of how we present you with the data is largely the same for kids and adults. It's loading a lot of data, that's why the browser is kind of a little sluggish, unfortunately. And once I show you the 45Q15, again for Argentina, we have vital registration and our estimates. There's actually an uncertainty bound that you can barely see, maybe here at the end a little bit in pink. If we take other countries, let's just pull up India, for example, you see that the uncertainty intervals are much larger, and the variety of data sources and the diversity of data sources is also quite a bit larger. But if you're interested in how do different countries, or what data is available in different countries on adult or child mortality, then this is a good tool to kind of dive into more details here. Also see how the diversity of data sources or lack of data sources is then reflected in uncertainty bounds. So once this is loaded, I'll show you as the last step the model life tables that we then use to translate the 5Q0 and 45Q15 results into the final mortality numbers. So we have what we call an envelope for the total deaths in a given country for a given age and sex across the analytic span for the global burden of disease. So here you see India, and you see a lot less data points. You see in green the sample registration system. You see a few, and as a reference, we have the results of the UN POP division, which we don't use as input, but you can use it as a comparison where our estimates and where does UN POP division see the estimates. And you see the much wider uncertainty interval, given that the sample registration system covers a lot less people than a complete vital registration system. I think that's as far as I wanted to go with the mortality tool. Again, if you're interested in exploring that in more detail and you have questions, I'd be happy to answer those. I'm going to move on to causes of death now. Are there questions about mortality analysis or the tool?
A nivel subnacional.
One sec.
Sí, digo, ¿la herramienta de mortalidad es solo a nivel país o hacia dentro del país también lo tienen ya, digamos, la salida, la visualización está permitida o está cargada para poder observarla de esa manera?
So you can only look at the national level for most countries. You can only look at the national level for most countries. For India, which is the example I have open here, we have urban and rural, where we model mortality separately. And then we have subnational results for England, Mexico, and China. Those are the first three where we did this. We will add countries over time and provide more subnational results. Hopefully we'll do it for Argentina at one point, but right now it's just these three. Okay, then onward to cause of death visualization. Again, if you Google CODVIS, you will find the visualization relatively easily, or you find it through the IHME website. What you see here is the age groups that we're covering for the global burden of disease study. And I pulled up, as you see at the top left, I pulled up ischemic heart disease for Argentina. We're looking at males. You have total numbers, rates, or percentage displayed as options to kind of what you want to see. Each of the graphs shows one of the age groups. So the the neonatal ones, then 1 to 4, 5-year age groups, 2 80 plus. Then we have all ages, and age standardized for some of the models is available as well. And what you see, again, relatively easily is one, the input data points. For Argentina, again, it's the vital registration system that provided the input. You see in blue the results with uncertainty from CODEM. So this is our cause of death modeling tool, and the results from this. And then in red, you have the result of COD correct. And this is the tool where we take all the cause of death results we have and make sure that they fit the all-cause mortality envelope. So to make sure that no death is counted double. And the total number of causes, if you add up all the causes, you get to the total number of deaths in a given year age sex group. And so you see all of that basically in one tool relatively quickly. And for ischemic heart disease, you see good progress until about 2000, and it flattens out a little bit. What you also see, though, especially in the older age groups, you see it in the younger ones, but as you look at older age groups, a very pronounced shift between about 95 and 96, which I believe is when you switch from ICD-9 to ICD-10. So there's still a certain discrepancy that we have to figure out how to deal with between those 2 years, and the level changes rather abruptly. What you can also do in the tool is you see all data that wasn't outliers or outliers. In the case of Argentina, since we have a very nice time series from the VR, there's no outliers, but you can, for some countries, with data points that are just way outside the range, and we would mark those as outliers and not include them in the analysis. You can look at the data points in the form that we received them. So here's the data points when we take them directly from the VR data that we received. And then the correction is the garbage code redistribution that Chris mentioned this morning, and you see that the percentage is going up by quite a bit, which means ischemic heart disease gets a lot of deaths redistributed to from other causes. So the first view is you look at different age groups over time. You can also switch the dimensions, and so in this view, you have along the x-axis age, and the y-axis, again, the percent of deaths, and then you look at different time windows and have the deaths grouped along ages for these, if you're interested in kind of how do age patterns change over time. Again, the analysis starts in 1980 and ranges all the way to 2015, so you can look at 5-year intervals in that time span. And then the last view I wanted to show you is, again, a map, which is now ubiquitous. We have those in all tools, but just a quick way of comparing then how does the death rate in a specific age group kind of compare between Argentina or your country of interest and all the other countries. This view you can also get from other tools like GBD Compare, which I'll show a little later. And you can look at with this tool at any of the causes that GBD covers. And then again get that in all the different visualization options. So this tool I think is relatively straightforward if you're interested in causes of death. There's actually not too many different options to play with as opposed to some of the other tools, and so hopefully useful for your purposes. Are there any questions about the cause of death visualization or the cause of death modeling? No? Crystal clear? Okay, very good. Then I'll move on to the results. So when we published the first component of GBD, mortality and causes of death, in December, We launched these two tools, and we created a tool specifically to explore mortality results in more detail. So what you see on the screen right now is what we call the life expectancy and probability of death visualization. And what you see right now on the screen is pretty straightforward life expectancy for males in 2013 at birth. And you see that the range is from 45 all the way to about 81. And what we have now in maps in most tools is we have this density plot in the legend. So you can very quickly see which countries are at the bottom or at the top, where there's more countries congregating around certain age group than others. And if you click on any one of these points, the country will light up in the visualization. So you see Lesotho lighting up here. Swaziland. So it's a quicker way of identifying which countries are really at the end of the spectrum, which, especially if it's island countries, can be very hard to do in some instances. You can also use little sliders here, which you'll also find in more and more IHME tools, and saying, I want to see just the countries where life expectancy in 2013 was under 65. They basically just fade out all the other countries, and now you see the world and only the countries highlighted that are within that age range. Again, a good tool if you're interested in specific, span. So you want to see, hang on, probably easy to look at what life expectancy do we have in Argentina and what other countries compare. So here's Argentina at 72 or so. So if you say who else is between 70 and 75, so compares life expectancy with Argentina, which, as Chris showed you before, and I'll show you in a minute, sometimes you want to look at comparator countries and how patterns might be similar, maybe countries that you might want to look at as you kind of dive deeper into the data. So we'll keep in mind that Brazil and Mexico and China are kind of in the same order of magnitude. So when we look at different country groupings, those might be interesting comparator countries to look at. This tool also allows you to look at trends over time in two different ways. One is, and I will lock the scale now, so this is a little option that if you look at different periods of time, you don't want the colors to change every year, right? You want to have consistent colors across the whole range. So you lock the scale, and then you press play and lean back and watch a little movie and see how life expectancy in 1990 ranged from 40 to 81. Then over time changed, and you see, especially sub-Saharan Africa with the advent of AIDS, how life expectancies all of a sudden get a lot shorter, when other countries progress towards longer life expectancies is actually progressing until we end up in 2013 with the patterns as we've established today. The other way to visualize that same information is to show change in the tool, and I'll unlock now because I'm not going to play the movie. So if you show change, the map lights up with the colors indicating where you have in the blues a long increase in life expectancy, and in red it actually decreases. Again, sub-Saharan Africa with the advent of AIDS between 1990 and 2013 had a big decrease. However, you can use the sliders to change which time period you want to see change for. So if you move that up to where the AIDS epidemic is already there, now you see very different patterns where now it's all yellow, but the reference changed. So light orange and yellows are also increases in life expectancy over the past 9 years. And you see that actually in sub-Saharan or southern sub-Saharan Africa, there was an increase in life expectancy as they started to cope with HIV. That's the life expectancy part. We do have a breakdown on where this change comes from. So hang on, I wanted to actually look. Change in life expectancy. Let's pick an example of where we have pretty dramatic change. So Ethiopia here has a 16-year improvement in life expectancy over the 23 years we're covering. So this chart type kind of breaks down first where life expectancy was back in 1990, that's the solid black line, where life expectancy is in 2013, that's the dotted line, and then you see in the colors which diseases contributed to an improvement in life expectancy, and on the left side of the tool, which ones actually detracted from life expectancy. So if you have India, for example, overall improvement, and it's especially the largest bar here, if you click on it, you actually get a handy little table which shows on the left self-harm violence, cirrhosis, took away from life expectancy 0.1 and 0.2 years. And on the right side, you have the long list of diseases where improvements in treatment or vaccination or maybe lifestyle changes helped improve life expectancy. And for India, there was large increases, 2.5 years based on diarrhea LRI, 1.4 years based on HIV and tuberculosis, and so on and so forth. So you get this change broken down. So for India, you see that there was an increase in life expectancy of plus 7.2 years. In South Africa, you had between 1990 and 2013 a decrease, right? So the solid line for 1990 is to the right of the line for 2013, and that is not surprisingly entirely due to HIV/AIDS. So we just looked at Ethiopia. You can add on this map any number of other countries until you run out of screen space. So if we want to add Ethiopia, it gets slotted in. I'm sorting right now by 1990 life expectancy. And here you see Ethiopia. Huge increase across all diseases. Specifically, hang on, let's look. Plus 7 years from diarrhea LRI, mostly in children, infants. But it gives you a very quick way of seeing, one, what drove the change, and two, how does it compare to other countries, and you can pick your own set of comparator countries. Argentina, in the list of countries we're presenting here, slots nicely in the middle with an increase in life expectancy of 3.6 years. We also let you explore these same data by probability of death, so you can look at it by map and by chart. And it shows you for the same set of comparator countries, they are kept. So if you move from one view to the other, the same list of countries will show up. It shows you how the probability of death, what the probability of death in a given year is for different age groups and across the different countries. And again, you can add and remove locations. You can look at different age groups and at different years. So this is, I think, a very powerful way to understand how mortality patterns changed over time and kind of what the drivers were. Are there any questions about the tool, about what we can show here? Whenever I don't get questions, I'm very happy because I assume that means everybody knows now how to use the tool, and hopefully will after I'm done with the talk here. Any questions? Okay. One button you will see in most every tool now is a little share button, and I'm using an offline visualization so that it's not going to work. But if you click here, it gives you various options to share the exact settings that you're looking at. So if you found an interesting set of countries, interesting results you want to share. Everybody awake? What was that? Fireworks? Okay. Well, it's a pretty good bang. Okay, so anyway, does anyone want to check the news and see if something happened? Okay, so if you use the share button in any of our tools, wait, no explanation? Okay. If you use the share button in any of our tools, it's going to store the exact settings. So either you can bookmark them for yourself with a little URL. You can tweet it, email it, share it with colleagues, and when they click that link, they'll see the exact same settings. So it's very useful to say, I just found something earth-shattering, literally, and share that with colleagues, and then they are able to see the same tool. So the next tool is the most powerful, also probably the most complex of our tools, and that's GBD Compare. There's currently a version on our website that you can already use, which is, compared to the one that I'm showing you now, that's going to go live next week, a lot more restrictive in terms of what you can do. So let me talk you a little bit through the functionality, because you saw Chris use the tool this morning, so you have a rough idea of what it's capable of. Let me just show you kind of how you get to these different options. Most importantly, you have various different visuals along the left side here, and I'll go through a couple of those to illustrate what you can do here. You have two modes of looking at this tool. You can explore, and this means you always have a map at the top and the other visual at the bottom. In each of those modes, you can expand one of the views to go full screen, and so it's easier to see some of the details, or go back to the two-slide view. And then you have the compare option. I'll just show you that very briefly. If you want to compare two different age groups, or you want to compare males versus females, So I'm just going to do that right now with the tree map. So now you have 2 tree maps, and you pick male at the top and female at the bottom, and that gives you a very quick visual how these 2 populations will differ in terms of disease patterns with the tree map. The last thing that is kind of an overarching function that you can use in any of the chart types, we are differentiating between basic settings, which we're seeing right now, and then advanced settings. And while visually it doesn't look like there's a big change, advanced setting lets you explore a lot more options than basic settings does. So I'm going to stay on that. Basic does similar things, but usually has less detail and a little less options. So let me go through the different ways of looking at the data. Like Chris said this morning, we have different metrics: prevalence, deaths, YLLs, YLDs, DALIs, and you can look at any of the charts with any of the metrics, with the exception of prevalence, which actually, when the tool goes live, will not be there for that very reason. Some of the visuals don't work well with prevalence, but you can always look at deaths, YLLs, YLDs, and DALIs. So let's do that really quick. So this is deaths for 2013 for females. If we switch from deaths to YLLs, right, we switch to how many people died to how many life years are we losing, which means that you get more of a weight for diseases that children die from. So at the global level, you see how in red the communicable, neonatal, nutritional, and maternal conditions play a much bigger role in terms of causing burden. We can also switch from YLLs to YLDs. Now you're going to see all the diseases that ail but do not kill us. So this is mostly non-communicable diseases, where now back and neck pain, other musculoskeletal diseases, diabetes, COPD, migraine, depression, and things like that will show up more prominently. And then if you combine YLLs and YLDs, you get DALIs, and you get that differentiated picture that Chris was talking about this morning. To review. So those are the metrics. In years, you always have the option to go back to 1990 and then look at 5-year intervals to 2010, and then also look at 2013. For ages, I want to make sure that you know that there's very different options. We have the larger age groups, which you'll find in the basic settings, 5 to 14, so adolescents, then adult ages, and then the older age groups. We always have age standardized, so especially if you want to compare across different countries, you want to pick age standardized to account for the different population structures in different countries. And then we have, and that's unfortunately right now a little hidden, we have age specific, and that is the setting that now will allow you to really look at every single age group. And you know what? Let's switch to Argentina to make it more interesting for all of you, or maybe you know all this already. This is neonatal DALIs, and we go from females back to both in 2013. And now I'm just gonna, like a little movie, I'm just gonna go through the age groups and show you all 20, and you kind of see the different patterns for DALI distribution amongst the different diseases. So you have the late neonatal, now post-neonatal. We see the first injuries popping up, 1 to 4 years. Kids are more injury prone, road injuries, fire, drowning. 5 to 9 years, you start seeing more and more non-communicable diseases. Iron deficiency is very big. 10 to 14, and once you hit the adolescent ages, you already see non-communicable diseases driving burden to a large extent. Then you have 20 to 24, the reproductive ages. Still a lot of injuries, which again we could look at male versus female. No, let's do that really quick. So 20 to 25, as you may expect, a lot of DALIs for male, more driven by accidents, injuries, and the likes. Where for females you have more non-communicable diseases and a lot of depression, anxiety, and again back and neck pain. But this basically starts to show you, once you look at a certain pattern and you want to explore that along any of the dimensions, this tool actually allows you to do so. And that's why we started with saying we want to make it easier. What can we take out? And we couldn't really find a good reason to take anything out, so there you have it. Now you have really all the results of GBD at your disposal. Just means you need to familiarize yourself with the controls, but then it's a powerful way of interacting with the data. So now I'm in the older ages, and you see how non-communicable diseases are by far the biggest factor, maybe with the exception of LRI and a few of the injuries. I'm not sure if Chris pointed that out. If you look at the tree map, The darker, if the color is very dark, that means a growth for that particular cause. If it's very light, it means it's declining. And you can actually look at just causes that are growing or just causes that are shrinking. We also give you an option to look at causes that where the change is statistically significant over time. So this is causes that are going down significantly, and those are the ones that are going up significantly. Okay, and then if we finish the age groups, then I'm going to go back to all ages. And as I said, feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions about the tool at where I am, because it might be hard to just go back to that. Then I'm happy to entertain that.
Peter, una consulta. ¿Se pueden ver las visualizaciones comorbilidades?
Excellent question, and sadly, no. We're working hard on figuring out. This is another large chunk of data that we want to make more accessible. For now, we have the charts that Chris showed that are in the papers, and we will certainly have a comorbidity visualization. Unfortunately, right now, that is not something I can see in the, or will be able to see in the live tool. All right. Any other questions? Yes, there was one.
Sí, quería saber quién les proveyó, quién fue la fuente de datos y si saben por qué no se llega más profundo a lo que es una regionalización o si existe alguna otra profundidad dentro de los datos.
Can you specify what you mean with depth? Like in terms of more dimensions or more granularity?
Exacto, sí.
Okay. Okay, so the sources are basically in the visualizations I showed on mortality and causes of death, where you see our results, and then you see the underlying data sources. And so that's the level at which we can actually show the data. So we have about 50,000 data sources from which we extract data. So census, survey, vital registration, all these different data sets. From these, we extract data in basically with the dimensions that we need to do analysis for GBD. So we extract 5-year age groups. We extract vital registration data mapped to the GBD causes. And so in the databases that then drive the research as well as the results, we are bound by the dimensions for which we actually have and extracted the data. So what I'm showing you in the cause of death visualization and mortality visualization is basically the level of detail where we can make actually not the input data available, but basically the research databases that we generated based on extracting, aggregating, and analyzing the actual input data sets. So you cannot drill through to like a vital registration data set or a survey data set, but basically this is where exploring the data ends. And so the dimensions that I'm showing you in GBD Compare are the ones that we're using for all the GBD components. And if we want to do subnational, if we wanted to do breakdown by socioeconomic status or other dimensions, that would mean that all the data need to be available with these dimensions. And so that is just for an analysis that covers 188 countries, impossible to do. We'll have next week a paper coming out for the UK, England specifically, where we have deprivation level information. And we have that across a large number of data sources, so we're actually trying to break that down. So within England, you will be able to look at regions and deprivation level, but that's not something we can do generally for other countries.
Maybe explain a little bit what deprivation level means.
My bad. Deprivation level in England, for those not familiar with that, which I shouldn't expect that, it's true, is in England, the population is broken down by a variable called deprivation level, which includes income level, education, access to the labor market, housing, and a few other variables, but basically breaks down the population into 5 buckets or deprivation levels, and so we are able to analyze burden. So that's going to be an interesting way to look at how are people in different socio-demographic strata, what are the health patterns within those. But back to your question, so this is basically the level of detail I can offer at this point. Any other questions? Okay, then let's look at a few other chart types. So that was the tree map. one thing to remember, you always want to go and change the settings back. There's no panic button like some cameras have, where when you change all the settings, you press that and it goes back to the defaults. You actually have to do it by hand or reload the tool, but then all your settings are gone. So this is the tree map. I'll just briefly go through the different visualization options. Another option is called what we call a pyramid chart. This is a great tool to compare different countries and look at the breakdown of burden. Again, all the metrics, all the dimensions like I showed you before. Here I just put up Peru, Mexico, Argentina, reading from the top. Peru, Mexico, Argentina, Cuba, Brazil, US, and Fiji. And you see the DALI rates per 100,000 and the breakdown into those 21 broad cause groups that capture overall burden. Again, in red, the communicable, blue, non-communicable, and in green, injuries. And now you can add and subtract countries as you wish. If you want to add Australia, Jed was probably interested in that. We can do so. I personally am from Germany, so I would add this. So basically, you just pick the countries that you want to compare yourselves to. I heard Canada mentioned several times when we look at comparisons. And then you look at comparisons between the absolute rate as well as the breakdown of diseases. If you're interested in just patterns, you can change the view and you can look at percentages, which basically means it fills out the block, and now you don't see the differences in rates, but you see the differences in pattern a little more pronounced, and see that, well, for example, Peru has a relatively smaller burden of musculoskeletal diseases than Argentina, and so on. I think that's all I wanted to show here. You can also, very important, so there are several chart types like this one. We have, the next one is stack column charts, where you have controls in the chart. So if you want to change what diseases you're looking at, you can do that on the right. That is very easy to overlook, because this is a legend, but it also allows you to switch which group of causes you're looking at. So if you're maybe just interested in maternal disorders, you basically limit it to this. And now, I mean, obviously we did something right, because maternal disorders do not show up for males. So our controls actually, worked out in this case. And then you can manually add and subtract diseases as you see fit. And basically, if you want to focus on a set of diseases, look in more detail at those. Okay, that's the pyramid chart. The stack columns are pretty much the same thing. I'm going to go back to the overview to show all 21 broad cause groups again, which together show the totality of burden. Here we're seeing DALI rates per 100,000, which are extremely high because for early neonatals, because it's per life year, and since they only got to live for the first in terms of deaths for the first week of their life, the rate is extraordinarily high. But you can also look at total numbers or percentages like for the others, and then see kind of the different patterns across ages. And this doesn't actually make any sense. I just sorted those by value, which is probably better. Here's the age group sorted from early neonatal all the way to 80 plus. And you can compare the patterns across ages. You can compare patterns across locations. And as I said, all location tables or all location comparisons, if you do it for one chart type, are consistent throughout the others. So once you have your group of comparator countries, any of the tools will show you the same countries. You can change the order back to values, so to compare where rates very high or absolute numbers very high versus very low. Look at rates, look at percent, and so on and so forth. So again, very quick way of getting an international overview or the overview between different countries. I'm going to switch now to risk factors. So before I do that, any questions? Excellent. So risk factors, and Chris talked about quite a bit about the methodologies we use to come up with risk factor results. You know by now that we're grouping them into behavioral, metabolic, and environmental risk factors. And you can now breeze through that chart. Let me make it big just so it's a little easier to see, because the map is actually, I'm not using that a whole lot. You see the risks. You see right now in percent what percent of total burden is driven by these different risk factors, and you see the breakdown again into the 21 broad cause groups in the according colors. You can either browse through that by clicking on anything that is underlined here, or you can change what category of risk factors you're looking at. At this level, it's all. You can increase the level, so that breaks behavioral down in its component, breaks metabolic down in its components, and then shows you an overview here. So this is kind of using the level slider, or if you just want to have behavioral broken down, you will now not see metabolic or environmental risk factor, but see these broken down into more detail. So that's behavioral. The leading one amongst behavioral is dietary, and then if you want to see more detail here, now we know in Argentina in 2013 for the entire population, the leading dietary risk factor was low fruit, which actually drove more than 2.5% of burden, followed by low vegetables, low nuts and seeds, low whole grains. So nifty little back button if you want to go back and look maybe at other behavioral risk factors. Tobacco breaks down into smoking and secondhand smoking. Alcohol and drug use is broken down in this component. So it basically gives you a way of cruising through the hierarchy of risk factors, either down a path or just increasing the level. So now if I'm in alcohol and drug use, I can change the category and say I want to go back to see all behavioral risk at that level of detail. And the list gets rather long, but you get a dedicated comparison between the different risk factors that we're covering. And again, don't forget, you have all the dimensions if you just want to see the list for males or females, or you want to look at rates or numbers instead, then this tool allows you to do so. Risk factors have one particularity that I just wanted to point out really quick in this chart, which we call an overlap map. So what you see here is for all causes and all risk factors, a chart that shows you first which part of the total burden is actually explained by risk factors. So attributed in Argentina for 2013, 44% of burden is driven by risk factors. The rest is driven by things that are not currently covered by GBD, other risk factors that we haven't analyzed. And then within risk factors, roughly half, you see in blue here, is behavioral risk factors. About 16% is metabolic, and about 4.5% is environmental. And then in between you see the overlaps. So for roughly 22% of burden, it's behavioral or metabolic, where the same risk or two risk factors could be responsible for the same DALI, right? So the risk factors are not cumulative. They actually, two risk factors can be responsible for the same DALI, and that is represented here in the overlap. So you have them between behavioral and metabolic. Here's a tiny little sliver where it's metabolic and environmental. A little bit of behavioral and environmental, and here in the middle, the gray area, but 1.5% is attributable to all three groups of risk factors. So there was a lot of discussions. I mean, Chris mentioned that there's a lot of discussions about risk factors in the first place. In terms of these overlaps, there was a lot of discussions. How much do we actually cover? Is there overlap between them? So this gives you a quick view to say, if we take a disease like ischemic heart disease, then there's almost all burden explained by risk factors, where if you take other, especially communicable diseases, the percentage might be quite a lot lower. So it's 93% of ischemic heart disease is explainable by the risk factors we're covering. The next two chart types I want to show you are quite a bit simpler. This is one of my favorite tools to very quickly look at trends. This is called arrow diagram, and basically you have on the left a rank of diseases in 1990, and on the right in 2013, basically just ranking by total burden. What I just did is break the causes down into more detail. So you go from the 3-cause group that Chris showed this morning to 21 to 121, and then to the full detail. And it's a very quick view to saying, hey, what are our biggest problems, and also where's the change the biggest, right? So drug use disorders in males of all ages, which we're currently set on, is a rapidly increasing cause. And now we can explore in different year ranges if this is a phenomenon that was, earlier in this period or maybe later. So drug disorders are here. Yes.
Can you increase the text size?
I can increase the text size. Thank you, Jed. Here I can actually make it really big. No, I cannot. There I can. Okay, good. Sometimes the tools are operating at their own speed. What? Good? Okay. Okay. Okay, so you can change the period that you want to look at, or you can say, let's see, what's going up? Low back and neck pain, rapid increase over this period. Let's look at females versus males. Whereas low back and neck pain much higher for females and also growing quickly. So again, ways to kind of identify which populations might be the most affected by the disorder. The other thing I haven't actually shown a whole lot, you can, for most of these settings, you can look at causes or you can look at risks. And so same thing, you have the rank in terms of what risk factors are driving burden in Argentina, and diet low in nuts and seeds. At this aggregation level is the highest. Maybe we'll go one level up. Dietary risks, then tobacco, smoke, then low physical activity, then alcohol and drug use, and pretty consistent across the time frame we're looking at. So that gives you a really quick glimpse of kind of order of magnitude as well as change. The last thing I'm going to show you is what we call heat map. And you now again see, and I'm going to go to causes as well, you see the countries that we picked before. And here for the country of your choice, we're pulling in the leading causes of burden in this country. So let me go to Argentina. If I click on Argentina, you see a list of, let's go back to both sexes. In 2013, by Dowley's, the leading cause was ischemic heart disease, followed by COPD, then lower back and neck pain, cerebrovascular disease, and so on and so forth. And now you can look at other countries. If we look at Mexico, and we look at where are big changes, well, diabetes is number 1 in Mexico, and it is number 7 number 9 in Argentina. Right, so in terms of just understanding differences in the health patterns and what are leading causes, what's bigger here versus bigger in others, a very quick tool for comparing yourself to other countries. Okay, and then this Chris showed the plot, which is the best way of looking at uncertainty. And you can look at uncertainty amongst different dimensions. You can look at the development across years. You can look at different age groups, ischemic heart disease. You can compare the two sexes. And in each case, you see how uncertainty differs. Cause is really interesting because now we're plotting all causes that we have estimates for, and they're one group by rank, and then you see the uncertainty balance. Ischemic heart disease has the highest contribution to burden, but also the largest confidence interval. But you quickly see little outliers like, is that Chagas? Chagas disease, with a very large uncertainty interval given how big the burden is. So those are kind of where we're looking at, and then looking, is there better data, is there additional data that we can use and help reduce the uncertainty. But it's also when you make decisions based on that, and you're saying, well, here's, rank in the top 50 or so. Really the difference between these causes here is not statistically significant because all these uncertainty intervals overlap. So we can rank them, but it's not statistically significant. So something one should look at, but as Chris said, most people don't, because it's much easier to interpret and to just look at the means. So that was GBD Compare. You also see a bunch more options up here. So as we launch this tool, you will get options to look at different to quickly jump from GBD Compare to other of our visualizations. You have the share button again, and you will be 4 months after publication able to download the data. So you'll be able to click download, and you get a CSV with all the data points we use to create a chart, and then you can create your own chart or use the data to create tables or just extract data points. But we want to make it as easy as possible for you to see, but then also to use the data. Help will have a bunch of little options to tell you how you can use tools, some usage tricks, some issues with some charts. Bug report will not be there. That's for me to tell the team if there's something that's not working. That is GBD Compare. Are there any questions? Yes.
Sí, otra consulta. ¿Cuándo es conveniente usar porcentaje y cuándo es conveniente usar tasa?
Excellent question. I mean, depends on the question that you're trying to answer. You saw probably if I look at risk factors, I find it much easier to kind of look at what percentage of burden is is driven by a given risk factor. If you compare across countries and you look at percentages, you see percent of total. And so that might distort if you do the comparisons compared to using a rate. So I would say it depends from chart to chart and question to question on what you want to look at. But I mean, remember that the percent is driven by the total, and it represents a share, and the rate is driven by the population. So for comparisons, it's typically better to look at rates. Any other questions? I might show one or two more tools, and I think then we'll switch to Jet and see if there's other questions that we want to answer. Not keep you here too long this afternoon. One tool, so this is one that we launched just a month or two ago, which I find really interesting. It has by a long shot, not as much data as we do in GVD Compare, but this is a tool where we allow you to explore some of the covariates we're using for analysis. So as Chris mentioned this morning, for diseases and risk factors where we have very little data for certain countries, covariates help us triangulate and create estimates for every country and every age group. And so educational attainment is one of those. And what you see is here broken down into three different charts. At the top left is educational attainment in males from 15 to 24 in 2015. And you get kind of a global overview of how many years of education do people in different countries have, where Argentina with 11.7 falls way above the middle compared to the US with 13.3, upper than Germany again, a couple others. And you see both how did things change over time in the country that you just chose. Let's go back to Argentina, look at the international comparison, and you on the right side see how for males and for females is educational attainment different for different age groups. So this allows you to look at one specific indicator, in this case education, and you can look at different locations. You also have the opportunity to look at uncertainty. So again, this is Argentina, and you see the range of uncertainty. I'll come to the data points in a minute. We have an indicator view, and that's one that is brand new to our visualization arsenal. So this allows you to look at two different indicators and kind of see how the world kind of maps along both of those. So you have on the right side a scatter plot, where on the y-axis, this is, and unfortunately I cannot make the text bigger here, is life expectancy at birth, which ranges from 20 at the bottom to 80 at the top. And you have educational attainment for both sexes in adults along the x-axis, and that ranges from 5 to about 15. And so every country in the world is now plotted on the scatter plot, and then the color that is underneath the dot is then put on the map. So you see countries that have high life expectancy and high education in kind of this purple. Like for example, the US is relatively high in both, and you see the dot light up in yellow right here at the top right corner. You have on the bottom left Guinea-Bissau, which is much lower in educational attainment and lower in life expectancy, and then other countries in between. If we look at Argentina, falls in the middle, high in terms of life expectancy and about the middle in terms of educational attainment. And then you can play a movie and look at this over time, and you see both the points move over time, as well as the map change as countries turn from kind of the red color with low educational attainment to the more blue colors with high educational attainment. And I'll let the movie play out, but you can pick any combination of of indicators to compare with different education variables. We'll build this tool out, we'll add more and more of our covariates, and you'll be able to explore correlations between the different covariates that we have, and then ultimately as well as health outcomes. So you could look at education and ischemic heart disease, and this education and obesity and things like that, and start to explore how on a global level are these things correlated, if not, and then see if you want to try and establish causation in this case as well. So I'll leave that to you to explore as well. The last view I want to show you is the data view. So for each of these indicators, in this case we have educational attainment, and we'll look at Argentina. You'll be able to see, much like in the causes of death tool and the mortality tool, the input data and the results, and you see there's not a whole lot of data that we had to use here. This is from the a data point from the 91 census, but we got that from the United Nations Demographic Yearbook. So it gives you detailed information on kind of the pedigree of the data, but then allows you to say how did we come up with these results, how well do we follow the data. Okay, I think I will leave it at that. Are there any kind of last questions about visualizations? How to use them? Yes, in the back.
Sí, son dos preguntas, en realidad no tanto vinculada a visualización, sino a análisis de los datos de estos. Yo lo que quería preguntar era, primero, si uno quisiera ver la evolución de una serie de datos a través del tiempo en un país, ¿qué tipo de análisis utilizaría para evaluar las tendencias? Si utilizaría análisis de series temporales u otro tipo. Y en caso de si uno quisiera comparar grupos de países, digamos, con algún agrupador, como podría ser quintiles de nivel socioeconómico o algún agrupador similar, a lo largo del tiempo, ¿qué tipo de modelos utilizaría? ¿Utilizaría paneles longitudinales o seguiría con con otro tipo de análisis de regresión? No sé si es el lugar, pero quería preguntarles eso.
The second one is probably a question for our researchers, much more than for me, because I will give you some half-truth, which if I'll put up my contact information, I'd be happy to kind of link you up with folks. Can you repeat the first part of the question, though, because I think I can help with that in terms of...
Para la evolución de los indicadores de este tipo en un solo país y evaluar la tendencia en el tiempo, que también entiendo sirve para la parte de pronosticación, de forecasting. ¿Utilizarían series temporales para evaluar las tendencias o algún otro tipo de análisis?
Oh, okay. Yes, so, yeah, the translator's getting interference. I think I understand the question in terms of if you want to look at trends over time in these tools, obviously for epi and risk factors, we only have estimates for 5-year intervals, right? So what you see in GBD compare in the plot, let's go here, is really tough to kind of, you see a rough trend over time, but you have very few data points. As opposed to causes of death and all-cause mortality, where we have, as I showed you in CODVIS, a much better time series, annual data points. Cause of death goes back to 1980 and all-cause mortality to 1970. So to do trend analysis, I would go back to these tools and kind of look at the longer-term time trends. For forecasting, we used to do, when pressured and saying we need data for a few years out, to do simple projections and just kind of draw out the rates that we have, but the model that Chris alluded to this morning, we're now getting much more sophisticated in terms of not forecasting the actual quantity of interest, so in this case ischemic heart disease, but we're looking at overall bigger population trends, so demographic changes in terms of population, fertility, and so on, how that impacts risk factors, especially for things like ischemic heart disease, where we know that alcohol, smoking, and on drive the disease. So we use the population changes, then we look at how that changes like risk factors, and then the cause as a kind of dependent variable. So we try to get at this more comprehensively than just looking at one specific outcome and then trying to draw that out. Any other questions? If not, let me just put up, as Jet gets ready to come up here, I just wanted to show you the Global Health Data Exchange very briefly. So on the screen, you just have a snapshot of the homepage. So if you go to ghdx.org, you get this interface. And if you see the little purple search data box, that's where you can type in anything from cancer in Ghana to drug use in Argentina, and we'll show you all the data sets that we know about. Whether we use them or even have them ourselves or not, you'll be able to see, here are data sets that might be useful for analysis in that respect. And then provides you a lot of the background information, including contact information on where you may be able to obtain this particular data set. So I just wanted to point you to this. if it's useful for kind of analysis, and if you're interested in where data come from and so on, that'd be a very good tool to start. And then the last thing I want to put up here are a couple of the URLs I mentioned. So if you want to learn more about IHME, healthdata.org is the URL where our homepage is, or you Google IHME. The data visualizations, I showed you the link before, told you the link before. Here is it written down again. Links to the data sources are in the GHDX, and then take down my email. Feel free to email me if you have any specific questions. For some questions I can answer myself, some like the one on which methods to use I have to kind of send to others at IHME, but I'm certainly happy to do so and help out. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Jed Bloor. Thanks. Jed is a senior associate in the Health System Solutions team at IHME. He's been working for us for years now, so he is IHME and methods expert, and he'll be here to talk a little bit more about GBD and answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. So, firstly, I want to say it's so great to see so many people on a Friday afternoon at 3:30. I'm sure you're all eager to go and enjoy the weekend. So, I guess what I would like for this afternoon session is for it to be a little informal. Questions from you guys. I have a few questions I would like to ask of you guys, and when you're responding, if you could just introduce yourself, that'd be really great. So the first thing I'll note is that the URL for everything that Peter was just displaying is this one here, healthdata.org/results/data visualizations. So if you want to write that down and navigate to that later. So I want to start by asking you, the audience, how will you use these tools? What will these tools do for you? How will they help you? How will they help inform your jobs? And which tools would you use, and what would you use them for? And you don't have to answer that question. If you have a question regarding anything else that you've seen today, I'd be happy to answer that as well. Yes.
Creo que primero que todo las utilizaríamos para...
Sorry, 1 second. I'll just...
Bettina Petrella, soy coordinadora del área de sistemas del programa Sumar en la provincia de Misiones. Bueno, lo que decía es que primero que todo considero que las herramientas nos van a ser útiles para definir políticas de salud a implementar a nivel nacional. Y por esto es que sigo insistiendo en cuanto a poder hacer la granularidad de los datos por provincia. Creo que Argentina es muy extensa y hay diferentes factores de riesgo en cada una de las regiones. Y la duda que surgía ahora es si cuando uno se baja la aplicación puede llegar a cargar los datos puntuales de la provincia a la cual pertenece, como para poder utilizar la herramienta y definir políticas más locales, políticas provinciales de salud.
Yeah, look, that's an excellent question, and I'm glad you raised that. So what the question refers to really is the power of local data, not just national data, because national data is for sure interesting for maybe the federal government here in Buenos Aires, but you're from the provinces, you need to implement your own policies, and you have your own set of health problems that differ on a local level. And so Chris spoke about the the projects, the relationships, the partnerships that we have with Mexico, with United Kingdom, now with Brazil and India, in going to that local level and getting the data from the local level. So that's the first big restriction is data. We won't be able to do that local level estimation unless we have data for all of the provinces, because it just doesn't make sense. If we're missing data from some provinces, it doesn't make sense just to put the national number for that particular province. You need data for all the provinces, and once we have that, and I think that will be something that will come out of today's discussions with Program Samara, that we might engage in a partnership to look at what's available by the local level. And we've already begun to have some small discussions about that. But I agree, that's the most powerful use of GBD. Yep, up the back.
Yo soy subdirector del hospital y creo que la utilidad de la información, digamos, tiene diferentes niveles. Creo que a nivel gubernamental o ministerial, esta información puede ayudar mucho en el diseño de las políticas públicas, y a nosotros, creo que también en los hospitales, esta información, si bien tiene mucho de nacional, nos puede ayudar a tomar decisiones en cuanto, por ejemplo, a tomar decisiones en cuanto al recurso humano que se incorpora para abordar las patologías que son prevalentes o que tienen mayor carga de mortalidad. Pienso que si bien no estamos acostumbrados a usar la información de esta manera, me parece una herramienta que es muy valiosa a diferentes niveles para tomar decisiones.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, that's great feedback for us to hear, because there's no reason for us to do this if it's not going to be used to inform decisions, and decisions that are backed by evidence are the best decisions. I mean, you have the resources that you have are limited, just like any countries. They're limited resources, and so you want to make sure that at every level, that your resources are being used to the maximum benefit of the population. So I think that's a really important point. Thank you. Anyone else?
Discúlpame, no me quedó claro y quería saber si al bajar la aplicación podemos cargar los datos de la provincia y hacer un análisis provincial.
So, one of the things about the GBD is that everything is done inside one framework. So we begin with a number of data sets that we can obtain, and then it takes minimum 9 months to process that data. So to run it through quality checks to make sure that the data is consistent across different ICDs. The coding is sorted. So Chris mentioned what we call garbage coding, which is basically ICD codes that are not useful, as you know. And so we have to do that across all countries by sex, by age, etc. And so the power of doing this in one framework is that you can make comparisons, because you've used the same method in Australia as in Argentina. And so when you have additional data, so you might have some provincial data sets, and we might be able to get some of those in our partnership, that will take some time for us to feed into the framework, to go through the checks, to go through the consistency checks, and then to analyze that data. And then only once we do that can we put that data into what you see here, and then you can go and download it. So, I mean, once the data is in there, absolutely you can download it, as long as it's not covered by confidentiality agreements. But first, yeah, we have to have a consistent and comparable framework, and we have to do the same thing for every country at once. Anything else you'd like to know? Any of the other tools you'd like to see a little more of? Anything you would like me to talk about other than the visualization tools, the GBD itself? I think Chris did a pretty comprehensive summary of some of the methods. I can talk very generally about forecasting. Maybe that's useful. Would you? I guess to explain partly why we're here working with the program Sumar team, and one of the things that Chris alluded to was the forecasts. So basically we have the GBD, the picture of health for Argentina for 1990, soon up to 2015. But you know, you might want to make decisions on how you can change your workforce to more adequately, well, not more adequately, but to make sure it's aligned with the changing population health. And so you want to know how the population health might change in the next 20 years. So we've begun a project whereby we take the GBD results, and especially the results on the risk factors, and we project those results, or we forecast those results forward by 20 to 25 years each year. So we have a forecast of what health will look like in 2016, in 2017, in 2025, in 2040. And of course, as you project further into the future, we're a little less certain of what the health will look like, so uncertainty will be a little larger, of course. But that kind of thing, I think, is a really powerful way to use the GBD to inform policies. And then you can start to put in counterfactual scenarios. So we can say in 2023 there was a big asteroid that hit Earth. How does that change in climate? Maybe not an asteroid, but you know, there was a big change. Let's say in the flu virus, it mutated, and there was a global pandemic. You know, what would happen to the health of Argentina if there was such a pandemic? So we can start to answer some of those questions. Would that be something that would be useful to you? Excellent. I see a semi-raised hand down the back. No? You were just giving a thumbs up. Okay, great, great. Yes, down the front.
Estos posibles escenarios con los diferentes factores de riesgo, ¿existe algún ejemplo? ¿Se puede ver algo? Si ya se utilizó para determinar algún tipo de política, y si se hizo, digamos, algo respecto de eso.
You mean forecasting? Forecasting?
Exacto.
So Argentina is the very first country for forecasting. So you're the number one focus right now for this new area. So yeah, we're really excited to partner with you, and really excited to see the results. So hopefully, well, I can't say when the results will be exactly, but we are confident that we will have results very soon. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Sí, te quería consultar por la diferencia entre proyecciones y pronósticos. Sí.
Yeah. You know, that's a great question. I think it's a question that is just related to the choice of word that we've decided to use, without going in and asking Google exactly for the definition of projection and a forecast. So I think perhaps, but if I think off the top of my head, I think a projection would just take what is currently happening and just project forward without any scenarios. So in forecasting, we have scenarios that we can also add in. So we can do this kind of what if, what if there was a pandemic. So I don't think, I think you can't really ask the what if questions if you call it a projection.
Sí, yo tengo una pregunta para hacerte. Yo soy Luciano del área de planificación estratégica de la UEC. Sé que entre las variables para armar los escenarios para pronosticar está el Producto Interno Bruto, el nivel de educación y los factores de riesgo. ¿Han probado o han pensado en algún momento algún otro determinante de alguna otra variable independiente o covariates para usar? Entre ellas, lo que es la distribución del ingreso, ¿sí? La distribución del nivel de ingreso. Si se pensó, yo sé que hace décadas que se viene estudiando la distribución de ingresos como un determinante de la salud. A ver si la han pensado, si la han tenido en cuenta o no, tienen pensado involucrar el modelo en algún momento.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty easy one for me to answer. So the answer is yes, absolutely. So we forecast income, but unless you mean, do you mean income that's on the household income or income at the national level, like GDP? Both?
Y bueno, ahora están trabajando a nivel nacional, pero hasta el nivel que lleguen, digamos, ¿sí? Cuando lleguen a niveles subnacionales, a esos niveles también, la distribución de ingresos a nivel estatal o departamental o en el nivel que sea, sí.
Yeah, so I mean, it would be really great if we could do exactly what's been done in the UK, what Peter alluded to, the deprivation level, which takes into account not just household income, but it's a broader measure of disadvantage, of poverty. And of course, your disease profile, what causes death and disability will vary by your income level. Just like Chris showed across countries, that will vary within a country. The restriction or the barrier there is the data. So if we have the data, I think, yeah, we should absolutely include it.
Buenas tardes, yo soy Lenka de San Juan del Sumar. Mi pregunta era, estos escenarios, estas proyecciones, ¿van a dar como resultados distintos tipos de escenarios, ya sea para el país en general y para las distintas provincias también?
Yeah, so until we have GBD at the provincial level, we can only do forecasts at the national level. But once we have GDP, once we have burden of disease at the provincial level, then yes, we will be able to do those forecasts. Yeah.
Sí, Andrea de Córdoba, entiendo que si el convenio, va a ser con el SUNAR reporta la información de todas las provincias, o sea que si esa es la información que va a ir al GBD, se supone que se podría desagregar por provincia. Esa es una... Sí, por eso no sé cómo va a ser el convenio, pensando que dijeron que era un convenio con el SUNAR, la información del SUNAR es la que le provee cada provincia. Eso, lo dejo como una duda, una pregunta. Y respecto a la primera pregunta que hizo, creo que sí, que la información siempre es interesante, sobre todo cuando uno lo hace a través de imágenes y lo visualiza no solo con gráficos, sino con y más cuando lo hace a nivel local. Creo que habla más que las palabras y es generador de sinergias mucho más interesantes, porque uno no lo está calificando, sino que está graficando lo que el propio lugar está reportando como información. Creo que por lo menos nosotros en particular en Córdoba nos está dando muy buen resultado eso, sin calificar, sino a la manera de decir cómo lo estás viendo. Nos ha permitido nosotros en algo muy simple, no a la magnitud a la calidad que tiene esta plataforma. Estamos humildemente trabajando con programas a nivel provincial en una sola plataforma y georreferenciando cada información de inmunizaciones o de cada uno de los programas, de recursos que cuenta cada localidad para poder que lo tengan en una imagen. Y creo que ha sido muy motivador para todos los actores poder sumarse al poderse ver reflejado y partícipe de un proyecto en salud. Así que bueno, y como consulta quería hacer si a la plataforma, más allá de lo que comentó Bettina, que nos parecería súper interesante, de intercambiar digamos, ideas por lo menos, es si también requiere de ingreso con clave de usuario y tiene algún perfil para las personas que ingresemos.
So, thanks very much for those questions, and I'm really happy to hear that feedback. You know, that's why Peter and I are here. That's exactly why we do the work that we do and we have done on the GBD for the past 8 or so years. So I'll take the last question first. Yes, we are. I mean, we're working with some of the programs from our team to give access because they will be GBD collaborators. And if you are a GDB collaborator, like I would ask all of you, invite all of you to become, then not only do you get access to the tools, you provide us with critical feedback. Because as you see, there's thousands of data points. There are hundreds of different models, and there are only so many people in Seattle, and there are not so many Argentinians on our team, and so we need your expertise. You know, I'm not an expert in the health of Argentina. I see the results, but I don't have the local knowledge that you have. You know, your knowledge is an invaluable part of the GBD, and we have some collaborators from Argentina, but I would, I would love for you all to be Argentinian collaborators on the GBD. That would be fantastic. And the second thing to say is that the visualization tools that Peter showed, most of them are online now. The one that will be online next week is GBD Compare. So log back in next week. We'll have an announcement as well, and you'll be able to log in for free.
Let me add to.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Hello.
Peter.
Two things to add really quick. I want to second what Jed said about collaborators, and we're always looking for others to help us with looking at the data, suggesting data sources. On the IHME website, so at healthdata.org, there's a call for collaborators on the homepage. So all it takes is click there, put a little bit of information down, about yourself and then become a collaborator. And one of the perks is that you get early view of the data and you get to chime in if you're not happy with the data. But the other one is that you become a co-author on the papers if you choose to do so. Right? So if you look at the Lancet, at the GBD papers, there's a lot of people listed on the right side. It goes on for pages and pages, but we feel everybody who contributes to this should be a collaborator on the project and a co-author on the papers. And then maybe about the question, the provincial question, which is a really good one, right? I want more local information. But it's not just having the data, which is very important, and in a collaboration with Sumar is certainly helping a lot to get these kind of data. But we need all data sources then broken down by province, which requires a lot of additional analyses, breaking things down, or re-extracting data at the provincial level. So it's quite a bit of work in Seattle. The current collaboration with Sumar is till the end of the year and has a very focus on the forecasting and looking at the data and what's there and what is not. We definitely need to discuss whether going forward we could continue the collaboration and include that. But it's more than just sharing data. It's really kind of putting the resources behind it to make that happen, which is non-trivial, but also not impossible.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Giselle, soy del programa Sumar de la provincia de Misiones y no me quedó claro, o sea, con los gráficos o quizás se me pasó de largo, si así como hay un mapa de árbol de las causas de muerte, también lo hay de los factores de riesgo o sí, los factores de riesgo lo que lleva a esas causas de muerte, porque a veces quizás actuar directamente o armar políticas de salud sobre las causas de muerte, pero obviamente primero hay que encarar las políticas respecto a esos factores de riesgo para quizás llegar después finalmente a las causas de muerte. Si hay un mapa también de esos factores de riesgo, no sé si fue claro.
Yeah, sorry. Let me go back to GBD Compare really quick and show you what that looks like, because we do. Here's GBD Compare, and I didn't show that. I think Chris showed that this morning. Let me go to the tree map, because you're completely right. So you were talking about deaths, right? So let's go to that also as a metric. And then move the... Okay, so here we have Argentina deaths in 2013 from both sexes. And so we do have a setting where you can look at the risk factors that are driving these diseases. And so for IHD, you can see here that 90% of ischemic heart disease is due to risk factors. And now you can go into more detail and saying, well, how does diet, for example, influence all these different diseases? So, right, so you get a sense of the order of magnitude of number of deaths that are driven by dietary risks or tobacco. Right, and you see the disease tobacco here is lung cancer, COPD, stroke, and IHD. Now, if you want to flip that around and you want to see how the risk factors affect the different diseases, then you go to this tool here, right, and look at kind of for deaths again, how do the different risk factors affect diseases? Does that answer the question? Because that's the two ways that you can look at risk factors. Either you look at the causes and then how risk factors are responsible for those, or vice versa, you look at a risk factor and how it breaks down to causes. If there's, and that's maybe back to the question that Jed asked originally, if there's a different way you would look at this, we would love to hear that, because any new idea like the comorbidity suggestion, certainly willing to entertain that, because we have this massive data set and we kind of do a lot of things with that, but we'd love to hear from you kind of what that is. So did you have something in mind where like how you would like risk factors mapped that goes beyond this?
Challenge. There was a question in the front.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi pregunta es bien práctica. En realidad el tema es, ¿la página solamente se visualiza en idioma inglés o se la puede ver en castellano también?
It is only in English for now, We have worked diligently for 6 months to make the platform so we can add languages. We will add, interestingly, Chinese first. Because we are collaborating on the provincial work with our Chinese collaborators, and there's even a bigger language hurdle. So that's the first, but now we have the opportunity to actually create other languages. The problem being we need people to actually translate, all the terms that you see need to be translated into Spanish, which especially for short disease names and short risk factor names and all the country, it's a lot of work, but yes, we will do that. When, I can't promise yet.
Perhaps you all can help us.
Me parece que es la primera vez que al menos yo veo esta herramienta. En la medida que uno la puede utilizar y podamos ponernos en contacto, por ahí pueden surgir diferentes formas de presentar o de las necesidades que tiene cada uno. Pero por ahora, digamos, no se me ocurre nada. Me parece buenísima la herramienta y me parece que realmente es muy útil, sobre todo insistiendo, como dice Betina de Misiones, bueno, bajarlo a la provincia, ¿sí? Pero bueno.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think the more that you use it, the more familiar you'll become with it, and the more you'll see other ways to interact with it. And then the more something might come to you, and you think, oh, that's not there yet. But yeah, please, we're both really excited for this to launch, in the next week, and to have everyone in this room, at least have a play with it and explore it for yourselves. There's another question somewhere down there.
Hola. Lo que no vi es, no sé si lo agregarían, es la atención de salud, la cercanía de atención de salud de la población, a ver qué cercanía tiene, si las personas tienen atención de salud, tuvieron promoción, prevención, también como factor de riesgo, educación, si fueron educados, esa población, si no es educado, no se va a prevenir de ninguna manera, así que si está pensado educación y atención de salud de esas familias pobres, etcétera.
Yeah, so just like with educational attainment, we have a variable that we use as a proxy for access, or as an indicator of access to healthcare. This isn't published on our website yet. I don't know how. So for education, for a number of years of schooling, you have pretty good data worldwide. For access to healthcare, it's a little bit harder because there are different ways you can measure it, and then not everyone measures it in the same way. Peter, do you want to add anything on that?
So we do. Hello. We do have a covariate access to healthcare that helps us identify kind of burden patterns. We do not. I think what you are aiming at is more where's healthcare delivered, what is the burden that is in that catchment area, and how do you go from pointing out the problems, which we're currently doing, to pointing out here solutions, and kind of how do different patterns in terms of where you provide healthcare to what population help. And the granularity we have for outcomes isn't enough yet to actually help with this. So I think as we drive into more granularity in terms of what the outcome patterns are, it's going to be more interesting to then say, for example, like Dr. Murray said this morning, if we have 1 by 1 kilometer grids for malaria and other diseases, it's going to be really interesting to see where the healthcare centers and how are we helping, with interventions. At the moment, right, or at the granularity we have right now, we're using it just as a covariate. There's really, if you had healthcare centers and where they're in the country, it doesn't really help right now with explaining the data or kind of enabling reactions to it. So I think that's going to come as we increase granularity.
Después de escuchar a la tarde, creo que usted me dijo de que está relacionado con la pregunta que había hecho yo a la mañana de los factores conductuales que tienen que ver con, estoy tratando de sumar, de que se va a trabajar con las proyecciones respecto a la carga de enfermedad y que lo que estamos viendo a nivel mundial, la transición demográfica, epidemiológica y como la gran problemática que tenemos que estar preparados, que son las crónicas no transmisibles, de las cuales en su gran mayoría todas tienen que ver con sobrepeso, obesidad, hipertensión, diabetes, que están relacionados con factores conductuales y que a la tarde ustedes dijeron que el 44%, si no escuché mal, de la carga de enfermedad se debe a factores conductuales. Me pregunto, y que nosotros como parte, en el caso de SUMAD y otras, la seguridad social tiene que ver con la financiación de estas patologías, pensando si se puede desgranar más, porque creo que si tiene tal peso específico el factor conductual, para nosotros poder tomar decisiones como abordarlos, por ahí hay que hacer una mirada más profunda probablemente sobre el factor conductual. No tengo cuál es la forma de consultar o demás, porque por ahí uno hace todo un esfuerzo de abordaje a través de mejorar el acceso, de favorecer la actividad física, de la dieta y demás, pero tiene que ver con un proceso propio de la persona en donde a veces la incidencia del sistema no se puede. Entonces por ahí hay alguna metodología para indagar un poco más profundo sobre esta cuestión.
Yeah, so on that last point, it actually turns out that you can change people's behavior. I'll repeat myself for the headphones. You can change people's behavior with all sorts of subtle policies. And so there's a unit in the UK government, I can't remember exactly what the unit's called, but basically behavioural, some kind of behavioural economics unit. And they run all sorts of experiments, one in which the local councils, when you get a fine, they experimented with the words that is on the letter that you receive when you get a fine, and it turns out that when you see a sentence that says, "Oh, and by the way, 80% of people pay this bill on time," so that changes what happens. So all of a sudden you have more people adhering to the bill. So I mean, you know, you can kind of, some people ignore parking tickets or ignore fines or whatever. But it turns out when you add that sentence, then less people ignore, more people pay, and you get savings at the council level. So they're not sending constant reminders. So this is all to say that similar things will be tried and might have already been tried for behavioural risks, for getting people to be more active. And so I think this is an area that is definitely amenable to change. But you're right, it comes down to the individual, but I think there is great scope for change in behaviour and for behavioural change to be driven by policies.
Let me add to that it's as you drive into this behavior change and how can you influence different populations, the more granular the population is that you're looking at, the better, right? So if you look at things at the country level, it's certainly interesting. Once you drill into more detail, it becomes a lot more actionable. So in the US, we did certain parts of GBD at the county level. So we drilled from the country to 50 states to 3,000 counties. And so it turns out that for the first time, you may have heard about the paper, for the first time in history, we could show that in certain county in the US, life expectancy is going down. So there's an industrialized country where, due to the effects of obesity and other often behavioral risk factors, life expectancy in these counties is going down. So we look more closely at how is obesity, physical activity, and so on developing in these counties. And even though across the US in most counties physical activity is going up, so is obesity. So it kind of shows that there's different populations that you reach with more activity, and they do that, but then you still have another part of the population where obesity is still going up and you have the negative health outcomes. What Jed said is certainly true. There's certainly measures you can take, but so far we haven't seen a proven intervention to turn back obesity.
And so I think that's an area that is we need to look much more closely at, especially for the behavioral risk factors, since they're driving so much burden, and it's up to us, right? So that's a really, really good point.
Con respecto a los datos que va recabando, digamos, históricamente, ¿existe algún análisis de algún país en el que hayan mejorado indicadores y ustedes hayan querido analizar las causas del por qué y qué tipos de políticas se tomaron para mejorar esos resultados? ¿O simplemente se van viendo para atrás qué parámetros o qué cosas cambiaron? O sea, ¿analizan sus propios datos o también, digamos, van un poco más en profundidad de saber si se hizo algún tipo de política en particular, si hacen un análisis de las políticas de salud o qué hacen en esos países donde los indicadores mejoraron?
I guess, do we analyze the health policies to improve the indicators? My answer to that would be no, but with a caveat. So the caveat is that certainly, you know, for, let's say, tobacco, I mean, we know that the Surgeon General's report that came out in the 70s or something in the US, and you can see very clearly key decisions, key policies, and the effect on mortality, especially lung cancer mortality and other smoking-related illness. The effect of policies, you know, there's correlation, but we infer that something happened and that it was the policy. And that decreased tobacco-related illness. I'm not sure I'm getting exactly at your question, though.
There's probably not much we can get at because while we would love to do this, again, it's hard work. So the one area we're exploring right now, we have funding to look at tobacco policies and the effect on smoking, and then we can quantify the shift in health outcomes you can accomplish. And so there we're going back to 1990 and looking at what do we see in terms of policies, regulations, and so on that were aimed at tobacco, and then looking at the effect on tobacco prevalence and then health outcomes. But the GBD platform lends itself very well to these kinds of analyses, but someone needs to pull together information for countries and the interventions that were being done. So we'll do it for tobacco and publish this, and then hopefully we'll find more funding to do that for other areas.
Ya nos introdujimos en el ambiente de las soluciones o las políticas. Más allá o sea, desde el punto de vista del policy maker, netamente de políticas, no desde el punto de vista ni científico ni académico, ¿cuánto compiten o se complementa la carga global de enfermedad y la encuesta nacional de salud? O sea, desde el punto de vista de un ministerio en que tiene que tomar decisiones para cambiarle o mejorar la vida de la gente, ¿cuánto se tiene que compite o se complementa apoyándose esas decisiones en la carga global de enfermedad o encuesta nacional de salud?
While Peter is going to demonstrate this point, I think I can safely say that no, there's no competition. In fact, there's national health surveys we rely on in some ways as one input into the GBD. So they're a very powerful, a very detailed, a very rich source of information. They're certainly not complete, and they're not the only source of information, but they are definitely helpful, and we encourage countries that perhaps haven't got a full national health survey to implement them where they can. Now, Peter.
I concur with that. I wanted to bring up, once my computer wakes up, it's Friday afternoon. I want to show you how health surveys help us inform estimates, and I think the key point I want to make with this is that since we're looking at all countries, all diseases, all risk factors at once, we have this consistent methodology, and we use covariates, regional trends to inform our estimates, right? So if this is actually a good example. Here's India, and you have a number of different surveys, right? So there's a summary birth history from the census, and we have a standard DHS, Demographic and Health Survey, which also has a summary birth history in it. So that helps inform. The green ones, let me see, that's a sample registration system. So we have all these different measures, and as you see, I mean, basically we disagree with all of them, but to varying extents, right? So I think the advantage that you have when you do something like GBD, you accumulate all data sources, and if you have very many, you try to make best sense of them. If you have too little, you use covariates and regional patterns to come up with an estimate, and in the end you have something for every country. And so we need the input from the health surveys. We are happy to engage in discussions. Why is our estimate lower or higher than what the survey showed? And oftentimes it gives good indications on what you could change in the survey, or kind of how the survey relates with other data sources. And so what we're trying to do is turn those discussions that sometimes are confrontational. A government can come to us and say, no way is HIV as high as you say it is. And then we talk about what are the data sources that they base their opinion on, what are our data sources, and see if we can incorporate data into GBD. And in the end, in basically all discussion that I can remember, you come to a point where it's like we all agree on kind of what's the level and how do we use the data sources and what methods do we apply. So I would think it's a very productive partnership that you have between the actual primary data collection efforts at the government, nonprofit, or other level, and then an effort like GBD where we're just using very many different other data sources and can apply the power of having access to all these data.
Sí, una preguntita más. Teniendo en cuenta que hay varios representantes de las provincias acá, yo sé que están trabajando a nivel subnacional con México, India, Brasil. ¿Cuál es el criterio para incorporar el nivel subnacional? ¿Es necesario que todas las jurisdicciones o todos los niveles subnacionales ingresen al mismo tiempo, o sea, cumplan todos los niveles subnacionales con los criterios de representatividad de las encuestas juntos, o ya con que haya una jurisdicción que cumple con los criterios de datos, de calidad de los datos, de completitud de los datos, ya es incorporado, o tienen que estar todas las jurisdicciones juntas para ingresar?
The short answer is that we need all of them together for reasons that, you know, we don't want to make one provincial estimate and just apply the federal estimate for all other provinces. I mean, I think you have to do it all at the same time, really. I don't think, and then it comes into fairness as well. Like if we're doing it for one province, you know, we should probably do it for all of them at the same time.
Yeah. Yes, and the modeling approach we're using, for example, for EPI, where you start the global level, super region, country, subnational, it just makes sense to have it all, you know, all at the same time. About your question in terms of what has to be in place to be able to do this, your point about funding is a good one, right? So we need the data to be broken down to the provincial level, but it is a lot of work. So we're funded right now to do the burden of disease at the national level for the world. So anything subnational, we need to find ways to actually fund that. And that can be, you know, coming from the country that we do the analysis for. There can be a partnership where we look for funding together or so. So those are ways we're trying to explore what we can do. But we don't have a set scheme saying, hey, once you qualify for this and this and that, we do it. It's we talk about kind of what's there in terms of data, what are funding opportunities, and then we try to do this in more countries.
Dentro del nivel nacional, ¿existe la posibilidad de poder diferenciar entre el sector público y el sector privado? Porque estábamos hablando recién de los factores conductuales y creo que esa diferencia puede llegar a absorber o a tapar ciertos datos que pueden afectar a la decisión política que se tome. No es lo mismo el sector público que el privado en Argentina.
Unfortunately, it's a very simple answer. We can't. So we have the national level estimate. We don't have a way to break down our estimates by public versus private, just like with subnational or income levels. We could do that potentially. So if we, again, it's a similar discussion as with subnational, if we have a way to get the data in a way that it's broken down public to private, then and the resources to do it. Can I repeat? Okay, sorry. The short answer is no. The long answer is what we would need to do is just like subnational analysis, figure out, can you hear?
Sí.
Okay, is how to get the data, and we need covariates, mortality, morbidity, and risk factors all broken down, right? So it's very hard for us to say public versus private if we only have it on, if we only have hospital data but no causes of death or no risk factors. Since GBD is this entity, we really need it broken down for all the different dimensions, and that's typically the hard part.
Ok, gracias.
Bueno, ya estamos como para dar como finalizado la jornada de hoy. Tenemos un café que nos está esperando y además ya hemos robado valioso tiempo de Jerry y de Peter. Así que para dar finalizado, buen regreso a ustedes y un fuerte aplauso para ellos que hicieron una gran exposición.
Yeah, can I just say as well, it's really been a great pleasure. This is my first time in Argentina, first time in South America, and it's been a fantastic experience. I've really enjoyed the hospitality that you all have shown, and I felt very welcome, and I'm really looking forward to coming back and working together with you on this. So thank you all as well.